Hello, and it is the very end of Technique Tuesday. Yes, I've been doing some really interesting reading and research during the course of the day about how we learn. How do we learn? It says, think on this. By learning new concepts, taking advantage of opportunities, and participating in new activities, you are physically changing who you are and opening up a world of endless possibility. That sounds really promising, doesn't it? I'm a great lover of watching TED Talks, and as a teacher it fascinates me about how people learn, who is more kind of devoted to their learning and who is more impatient when it comes to their kind of vocal prowess. Because you do actually have students who become very irritated that they don't seem to be making progress and can't understand and maybe procrastinate a bit, whereas you get other people who kind of plod along and just implement very small amounts of the suggestions that you make, but actually over the long term they make progress. And anyway, so this fascinates me because obviously, because everybody is different, you have to apply a different kind of teaching to every single student that you might have. So that can be really frustrating. So in a bid, I suppose, a little bit selfishly, to kind of work out why some people are really forthcoming about progressing along their vocal journey and other people choose to take a much slower route, I decided to help myself out and do a little bit of study. So this is what I've done. I've actually been working on a new, slightly bigger infographic called How We Learn to Sing Well. And I've been coming to terms with this new word today called neuroplasticity. Let me just condense it for you, and I'll have to refer to my notes because I've been watching this lecture and it's very interesting, and I think it's so relevant to how we learn music and how we learn how to sing, any kind of skill that seems to be unattainable, I should say, how we go about it. So think neuroplasticity. Every time that we learn a new fact or a skill, we change our brain. These changes are not limited by our age, which is really good news. As time goes by, yeah, sure, I think about changes that are going to happen, and I know I'm not alone in that. So it's good news to know that it's not limited by your age and that they are actually happening all the time. Now, the brain can change in three basic ways to support your learning. Number one is the chemical of the brain. The brain transfers chemical signals between neurons, and these trigger a series of actions and reactions. To support learning, the brain can rapidly increase signal concentration to facilitate speedy learning in the short term. Now, the way I understand it is that if, say, you do a bit of practice one day and you actually can see and feel a difference in the way in which you're approaching it. Say, let's put it in singing terms. Let's say it's lip trills. And you try, and then one day you think, oh yeah, absolutely, I can feel that it's changing. And then you go back the next day and you can't seem to do it again. It seems to have evaded you and eluded you in the biggest sense. Well, this is what's happening. It's just a short-term thing that you've actually done. And what you need to be, why practice and the kind of practice, the right kind of practice that you need is so important, is because we actually need to change your brain's structure when you are acquiring a new skill. And this takes a lot longer. So just let me read these little notes here. During learning, the brain can change the connections between the neurons, literally changing the physical structure of the brain. And this takes a bit more time and more sustained effort. Okay. Now, what's important here is this, that these structural changes are related to long-term improvement in a motor skill. So the automatic way that you might respond to learning your singing skill is that over time you won't have to worry about your breathing because you will have acquired that skill. Your body has learned those muscle memories. Okay, whereas if you're just doing the short-term quick bursts of activity and thinking that's your practice, then all you're doing is you're just kind of altering the chemical balance really, and not moving towards structural change. So the chemical change only supports short-term improvement in a motor skill and does not reflect learning. Okay, so that's numbers 1 and 2. And the third way is function. As we use a brain region, it becomes more and more easy to use or access again. Hence what I was saying about, perhaps we could say when you're, I don't know, driving a car, sometimes when you first learn how to drive, you've got to think really hard about the way in which what you're doing when you get in the car, and what's the first thing you do, and looking in the mirror, and how you're going to change the gear, and when you put your foot down, and stuff like that. So as in singing, the more you use the correct pathways of learning, which is a constant kind of trickling of ideas and focus, just like I was saying previously in a previous Technique Tuesday update, because actually as we use various regions of the brain, it becomes easier to repeat the pattern, to actually re-access the skill you can feel coming. So for example, the passaggio is a big problem for lots of people, because there's a big resistance to make that awful sound you make whilst the passaggio is actually kind of happening, if you like. But over time, the more you access it and actually give it a different treatment with a kind of open throat approach and not getting in the way of what you're doing, then eventually you start to learn that function. Of course, we are impatient as learners normally, and we want to skip and then become frustrated. And maybe that's why sometimes people stop singing. Okay, but when we revisit these kind of areas of the brain, and we're actually changing the function of the brain, then the rate at which they interact and connect with each other, all these little neurons shifting and networking together, this ultimately changes the function of the brain. Hence you acquire a vocal skill, or you play the piano really well, or anything like that where you have to actually facilitate this. Now, I'm really quite excited by today's work, because actually it's kind of helping me as well, trying to understand the psychology of the teaching and why some people are they never seem to really attain their goals vocally, and they're always coming up against the same problem. I have these issues too, and I am still working on them, but I suppose that supports what I've always said, which is that it's a lifelong learning skill, singing. So you have to really be in love with it and get a good kind of vibe from it to keep doing it. But here's a final thought. So these functional changes are directly related to achieving and becoming more skilled. Now, here's the rub, okay? And this is the thing that probably most people don't like to hear. The primary driver of change in your brain is your behavior. Nothing is more effective than practice. And the bottom line is you have to do the work. It doesn't mean it requires lengthy hours of practice. What it does mean is that when you're learning, you have to be willing to go back and back and back again and revisit those areas, those troublesome areas, and then, have another go at winging it in a performance. I mean, performance is really important, because you do have to kind of just, like little fledglings coming out of the nest, every now and again you have to try to fly. And if you're just caught up in learning the technique, you'll never know if you can really fly. So yeah, you learn a little bit of vocal technique, but then you push yourself a little bit harder. And one thing I did learn today, that often difficulty, things that are hard to attain, will increase and speed up the rate at which you learn. So when there are challenges, or you've got a teacher who is pushing you to do more and saying, actually, no, this is not good, you've got to actually try it this way or that way, or I can still hear the little imperfections, they are really doing you a service, because they're making you learn more. So that's quite thought-provoking, isn't it? But a worthwhile lesson. And actually, I'm finishing my Technique Tuesday feeling like the clouds have parted and the sun is shining and I can see a little bit more clearly. that make sense? Okay, next time. Enjoy your singing. Bye for now.